Good morning, everyone. First of all, I just wanted to congratulate the entire team of civil servants, of our elected officials that were involved over years, actually, in achieving what was announced this week. Manitoba was announced as top of the class for red tape reduction. This is a Canadian Federation of Independent Business extensive report card that they develop. We earned our fourth consecutive A, and it's important to understand. We're graded in 3 different areas, all the provinces, on regulatory accountability, regulatory burden, and interprovincial cooperation, and we came out on top. This is important. We're acknowledged by this national organization as a North American leader in regulatory accountability. And they said that we earned the best overall score because of that commitment to accountability, and also our commitment, which has been ongoing, to lower the barriers to doing business among our Canadian provinces. And to get those barriers down is really important. This is an important distinction that we've earned as a province, because it positions us better to recover from the negative impacts on our economy from COVID. It'll position us better to attract capital to our province and within our province to create more jobs and more opportunities for Manitobans who want to get back to work. So thanks to everybody who's been involved so much in this, and on an ongoing basis continues to be involved to make sure that job-killing red tape doesn't get in the way of the jobs that we want for our friends and neighbors and our kids here in Manitoba. I want to talk today about the Lake Manitoba outlet. This is a top priority for our province. Our provincial government's been pushing for this outlet to be built, and for a partnership with the federal government that's essential to get it built since we came to government, and that's 4.5 years ago. And we have found over the last number of years that the federal government seemed to keep coming up with reasons why it should be delayed as opposed to reasons why it should go ahead. And I want to note that that's changed since our meetings last September in Ottawa. And I want to say thank you to the federal government for that. We met with the Prime Minister and discussed this issue. We met with the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, and I had a further discussion with Dominique LeBlanc this morning on this and other issues. We met with the Infrastructure Minister, we met with the Environment Minister, we met with their senior officials, and we followed up to build on that working relationship. And I am pleased to say that the federal government is demonstrating finally, rather than why we shouldn't do this, how can we get this moved forward. And that discussion continues this week with further meetings between our departmental leaders and federal environmental team. It'll continue next week, and it is my sincere hope that we can move forward on this project. Why? Well, this spring marks the 10th anniversary of the tragic floods of 2011 that Manitobans remember all too well. We know much of the hardship that occurred as a consequence of that flooding. We also know that it could have been prevented had we had flood works in place, and we did not have them. We know the human suffering that it caused, not just with non-Indigenous communities or the Métis communities in that area, but also with the Indigenous communities. We know that Lake Manitoba First Nation, Dauphin River First Nation, Jackhead, Lake St. Martin, Little Saskatchewan, Pinemutang, Peguis First Nation, Fisher River were all impacted and most affected by the events of 11. Many of the people from those communities had to move out. They were forced to evacuate, and many of them did not return. Many of them tragically passed away. Many of the elders we lost as a consequence, in part, I think, of the stresses caused to them of having to move away from their homelands, to move away from the lives they were experiencing in their home communities into the city of Winnipeg, into other environments. Created incredible hardship and stress for families and for whole communities. So we know that, and we know that we don't want it to happen again. And we also know the actual cost to taxpayers of these things is enormous. We know that our bills just from the flood claims and the potential flood claims that are going forward, still going forward, is in excess of $2.2 billion. That's our estimate. This includes, but is not limited to, Operation Return Home, relocation costs, resettlement costs, additional costs for various lawsuits. We have a lawsuit going to court just this month, next month, I should say, in February. The Pislovich lawsuit, which could add as much as $180 million additional dollars to the flood costs. These dollars have had to go to repair and will continue to have to go out of the pockets of hardworking taxpayers to repay and repair damages caused by a flood that could have been prevented had we had an outlet constructed. We could have built, in theory, we could have built as much as 4 floodways. Why we would build 4 is beyond me, but we could have the fiscal capacity to build 4 such floodways with just the money that's gone out to pay the damages from this 2011 flood 10 years ago. So we don't need to have another flood to understand that we don't need to have another consequence like the one we had in 11. And so I was pleased to have the discussion again today with Dominique LeBlanc, our Intergovernmental Affairs Minister, to ask for his assurance that the federal government move forward to sign the flood agreement with the province of Manitoba. I'm asking them to advance their commitment to join with us in Manitoba to protect Manitobans now and future generations of Manitobans from future flood disasters by officially signing the joint Canada-Manitoba funding agreement for the long-delayed Lake Manitoba, Lake St. Martin Channels project. Nous demandons aujourd'hui au gouvernement fédéral de faire progresser son engagement conjointement avec le Manitoba de financer cet important projet d'infrastructure. This is a project that needs to be built. Calling on the feds to sign this funding agreement should signify to Manitobans and to the federal government that we understand delays are dangerous, delays add human costs, delays don't give people their lives back. And the people of this area, people of Manitoba, our friends, our neighbors, our families, have been sacrificed for generations now to protect the rest of us. Now it's time for the rest of us to get together and stand up for those same people. That's what we're going to keep doing, and I hope I have more detail to report to you in the not-too-distant future, but I wanted to make it very clear I am thankful for the supportive cooperation of the Minister of Infrastructure, Minister McKenna, to the Minister of the Environment, Minister Wilkinson, also to our Minister of Finance now, former Deputy Prime Minister and Intergovernmental Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland, and also to Dominique LeBlanc for his cooperation and support in this. And I know that I speak for Manitoba's MPs in saying this is a high priority project. And I would hope that all our MPs would make their voices heard, whether in the government side of the House or in the opposition side, irregardless, that this is a project that needs to happen, and it needs to happen now. I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. A reminder to our reporters on the line, you will have 1 preliminary and 1 follow-up question. Up first this morning from the Brandon Sun, Kyle.
Good morning, Premier Pallister. I was wondering, in your mind, what if the best case scenario takes place in terms of the federal government being, responsive to your requests, when would you like this project to really get off the ground in the not too distant future?
Oh, the sooner the better. Our consultations are underway already. We have every First Nation that's affected signing on, and we're working through the consultation process with them as is required by federal legislation. And we look forward to getting shovels in the ground as soon as possible and getting this underway. Sooner the better.
Okay. Thank you. And I know you mentioned some of the nearby communities that were most affected by the 2011 flooding and would benefit the most from this project moving forward. But what's kind of the general scale of how effective this project would be? Like would the outlet moving forward, would it help communities for, say, in in communities in Westman that experienced their own kind of massive flooding this past summer.
Well, quite frankly, it'll help all of us. It's taxpayers that fund the compensation that has to go back to the affected landowners, the affected communities, the affected small businesses, and these are costs, real costs. As I said, we could have built 4 such floodways with just the damages that have been paid or are going to be paid as a consequence of a flood that happened 10 years ago. So foresight says, let's prevent this. And previous governments have done this when they built Duff's Ditch, as we like to call it, when Premier Dewar wisely expanded it to offer greater protection to the city of Winnipeg. But now we need to also make these measures to protect the people of that region who are, for many years, the people who we deserve to give credit to for protecting us by taking on the risks of additional water in their areas and their communities so that it wouldn't come to the city of Winnipeg. We're all in this together, and so I'd say to the people of Westman, because of that, I'd ask for their support, just as I have asked in the past for support for projects, water management projects in Westman and parkland regions of the province.
From CJOB, Clay.
Good morning, Mr. Premier. Cost sharing, I sort of missed the beginning there. Could you just run down again the cost sharing for this project? What would the provincial contribution be, and what would the federal contribution be?
Well, we'll ballpark it, Clay, and say it's a 50-50 deal. We're committed, we've already committed close to $80 million to the preparatory work for this project as a province. But the project itself has been estimated at anywhere between $450 million. We expect those estimates being done a couple of years ago. It's higher now. But we need to get the project going, and we've asked, and I have had verbal commitment from the Prime Minister in the past that this is a project the feds would share in supporting, but I want written commitment now because I think that's the way to give the folks in Manitoba the assurance that the project's going to go ahead.
Okay, January is almost over. We're almost into February. I know it's very early to predict. I mean, no one can predict a snowstorm that'll come out of nowhere, but we've had very little snow. Are you hopeful that whatever flood season we have this year will be minimal?
Well, you know that saying, the good Lord only gives you as much as you can handle, Clay, and it would be our hope that people of Manitoba have been doing enough burden carrying without getting a flood, but the reality is we can take action now to prevent the consequences of one going forward. That's a smart thing to do, and that's what we should be doing.
From the Winnipeg Sun, Josh.
Good morning, Premier. This is Josh Aldridge with Winnipeg Sun. I know this project has been delayed by many consultations. Are there still consultations and engagement with the communities, the different partners still going on, or is this just needing that signing by the federal government to move things forward at this point?
Well, we can do both those things at the same time, Josh. We have our consultations underway in virtually all cases now. All the First Nations have signed on to the consultation agreements. Some of those have been going on for some time now. COVID obviously has been, an interrupter, but we're moving forward on those in a very cooperative way. And I also encourage the federal government has a parallel system. I've encouraged for some time, even back to the days I was an MP, that these processes should be melded together. The provincial federal process should be unified, but it isn't yet totally unified. So the federal government has their own subsequent consultative process that they're engaging in too. That doesn't mean that we can't get the preparatory work done, and we should be able to get agreement on the funding and get that in place now to give the folks in our province the assurance this project's a go.
Okay, and I want to ask you about another topic, another issue that came up today. Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms legal challenge of the health orders is going forward with 2 hearings, one in February challenging the authority of Dr. Brent Roussin and one in April challenging the constitutionality of the health orders themselves. I was just wanting to give you an opportunity to respond to this legal action that is going to continue or proceed.
Well, I won't respond, Josh, as you'd expect, to any legal action because it's a legal action and it's underway, so I'll let that happen. I'll just say this, thank God for Brent Roussin and our health officials and their guidance through this entire pandemic. I really appreciate their work. And I'll tell you that it's as tough as this has been, the fact that Manitobans are respecting that work generally, and not exclusively and not totally, but much better than I understand in some other areas of the country, people are respecting the work of public health officials. I'll continue to stand with Brent Roussin, Lynette Siragusa, and our other health leaders and thank them for their work.
Thank you.
From CBC Manitoba, Bart.
Hi, Mr. Premier. At the City of Winnipeg today, there's a motion about looking at a safe consumption site. You may be aware the city during the pandemic is having an issue with its bus shack, normal supports in places where homeless people and people at risk, they're not around. So the city is exploring the possibility of going ahead on their own with a safe consumption site. Your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are, as they've been, that we're going to continue to invest heavily, and we've focused on this in mental health initiatives, and we've done this cooperatively with various agencies, including with the City of Winnipeg. And our strategies going forward are to continue with that cooperative effort, and this, of course, is in part why we created a new ministry to focus on mental health issues, not exclusively, but largely on issues affecting those who deal with addictions. We want to make sure we do the right things, and we continue to do the right things, especially with the exacerbation of these kinds of challenges as a consequence of COVID. I think it's very timely that we work together cooperatively going forward as well.
So on that note, given the unusual circumstances of the pandemic, just on a yes or no basis, would you forego your previous opposition to safe consumption sites on an emergency basis?
I'll let the minister speak to the specifics of the issue, but again, we focused significant tens of millions of additional investment in working with those who have addictions, and I know that the mayor has been of the view for some time that he would like to have what he calls a safe consumption site, and we have been of the view that that would be a lower priority investment than the tens of millions that we're investing in other preventative measures.
Thank you for that.
From CTV Winnipeg, Jeff.
Oh, hi, Mr. Premier. Just following up on Bart's question. A couple of years ago, you said you just don't believe that safe consumption sites work and that they attract crime. I'm wondering if that's still your view.
Well, nothing works perfectly, so I wouldn't want it to be taken as an absolute statement that there may not be some conceived value from such sites. I don't think that it's as high a priority as perhaps some others do. We are investing in many, many other initiatives, and our new minister can outline those for you in detail. We can provide a briefing, actually, if any of you are interested in reviewing the extensive investments that we're making and plan to make in preventative activities that will assist those who are dealing with addictions in their lives.
Thank you. And can I just go back to the outlet, if I could, for a second? I guess I'm not quite sure if you could just maybe explain it better. You said the federal government has now shown more of a willingness, as opposed to in the past, to move this forward. What changed? Like, what did they say that changed? What obstacle did they take out of the way? Can you be specific?
Well, sure. I can tell you that for years, we kept getting additional requirements piled onto us as a province by not exclusively, but often the federal environmental people, and they were not communicating those until after the fact. So it was going like this. Federal government poses a number of questions. We do our best to answer them. Federal government comes back, poses more questions. There's a clock that doesn't tick every time the federal government poses more questions. This clock represents the 1 year that the federal legislation says they have to decide on a project application. Every time they added more questions, they stopped the clock. So as a consequence, we are now 4.5 years into this, with clock stopping being the habit. Now, since last September, when we extensively reached out to these various departments on this project and on a number of other issues, I might add, we've seen some changes in that approach, and there's much more willingness on the part of the Environment Department to sit down at the table with us and work through some of the issues rather than simply stonewall us and cause more delays. I want that to continue, and I think all Manitobans want that to continue too.
From City News, Jonas.
Good morning, Mr. Premier. On the flood work that you're hoping for, I know you're putting some pressure on the feds this morning, but I just want to touch back on the injunction from this summer from 4 Manitoba First Nations. They want a successful injunction on the project. How is that changing plans moving forward, or how has this impacted plans for you guys right now?
Well, I think you're probably referring to the injunction which was defeated in court on December the 23rd, where it was demonstrated in the court decision that this was a groundless attempt to delay the process and that it had no basis in actual fact. If that's the court challenge from Interlake Tribal Council that you're referring to in the Manitoba Métis Federation, that case was lost and well lost.
Thank you for that, sir. I missed that over Christmas. I appreciate that update. Just as far as a timeline, if the feds do give you the go-ahead, I mean, how soon can shovels get in the ground?
Well, we've done some preparatory work, but we would really like to get going with more this spring. We'd like to go to tender. And I will say this, and this is not, this is a shovel-worthy project, and I think all Manitobans know that, but it's also shovel-ready. And we are going to need to create more jobs and more economic development in our province post-COVID. So this is a really good project for that as well. And there are Indigenous opportunities and Métis opportunities to work here too, which I would mention. So there's an opportunity for people to get some good, well-paying jobs, doing meaningful work to help save their communities in the future and to help protect one another. I think it's a win-win-win for everybody involved. And I don't see the case for delay, which has been extensive. I don't see that case getting made as frequently, as I've said before, by Ottawa officials now. And I wouldn't want to see it rear its head again, because the longer we delay, the more pain we cause the people of that area and the more risks we impose on the people of Manitoba in terms of having to pay for compensation, like the $2 billion plus that 11 is costing us.
Mr. Premier, our final reporter this morning from the Winnipeg Free Press, Larry.
Premier, are you concerned about the optics of the chairman of the board of a major health authority deciding to travel to Arizona at this time against the entreaties of yourself, Dr. Roussin, and federal officials? What do you say to the average Manitoban who is outraged by this?
Well, I'd say I'm disappointed. I've said it repeatedly and I'll say it again. Don't travel now. This is not the time to do it. I'll also remind people too, this is a volunteer you're talking about. This isn't a political staffer, as you've well referenced in the past. This isn't a person in our bureaucracy. So I would make that distinction. This is a person who, apart from per diem, is one of over 1,000 people that have volunteered to serve on a board in our province. And so, I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying that the person involved is not a paid staffer of the government like 1,000 other people. They serve as a volunteer.
But he holds a pretty important position as the chair of the board. Of the WRHA. He's responsible for overseeing the operations of the executive and of the WRHA. So your health minister said yesterday that the government would not remove Mr. McWhorter from his position. Is that the government's position still? Will he not face any sanctions? And is this a question of folks in high places being allowed to travel with impunity if they have the right connections in government?
Hardly, but the question and the way it was posed, Larry, demonstrate yet again your paper's tendency, whether it's editorially dictated to its reporters or not, to focus rather harshly on negativity and to be critical of the government. You published the 5th story on my work in Ottawa last year. This week, you referenced it in a way that created the impression that I'm somehow disrespectful of taxpayers, and I resent that, Larry, because it's false. I've never flown on the taxpayer on a business class ticket or first class ticket. I cover most of my costs myself. And when I see a report like today in a Toronto paper outlining the Trudeau family's vacation in 19 costing taxpayers over $200,000, but I don't see reference of it anywhere in the Free Press, yet I see you 50 times reporting on my family going to the same place, Costa Rica, without costing the taxpayer a nickel, I have to ask myself, is that professional journalism, Larry? I have to ask myself that question, and I think the answer to that question, honestly, is no, it is not. Thank you.